exciting episode of the OKR Q&A Podcast, also known as the OKR Corral, where OKR Insight is king. I'm your host, Tim Meinhardt, CEO of Atruity, an OKR consultancy headquartered in our nation's capital. On today's show, we're delighted to spend time speaking with Dustin Clinard. Dustin provides some fantastic insight into OKRs and the OKR adoption journey. Dustin has an MBA from Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management, and he's currently the Vice President of Strategic Partnerships at Betterworks. Betterworks is a world-class OKR software platform supporting global workforces in over 119 countries and in more than 20 languages. Please welcome Dustin Clinard. Dustin, welcome to the program. Tell our audience a little bit about yourself and your background.
Sure. Thanks, Tim. I'm pleased to be here, and I love the effort that you have. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Dustin Clinard. I run partnerships for Betterworks, which, as you may or may not know, and many of your listeners might know, is the OKR software that is endorsed by John Doerr. It's the only software that's endorsed by John Doerr, and we're lucky that we have John's relatively recent release of Measure What Matters as a book that helps as we think about enacting change within businesses. I live in Boston. I have 3 daughters and a son, and the coronavirus pandemic has created for many people, including myself, some interesting dynamics, most of which I'm very thankful for, because I'm now home for dinner, and for the last 15 years I've been on the road, so it's been great.
Fantastic. You know, I just want to share with the audience, I had the pleasure of listening to John Doerr in one of your, I guess, webinars or podcasts, and I actually received a signed copy of his book, and it sits in my trophy case downstairs, and it's a very wonderful piece to have, and I think he and Andy Grove are very insightful in presenting this methodology to the public. So, Dustin, talk to us a little bit about the OKR marketplace, not only in the United States, but globally. What are Betterworks' thoughts about the OKR marketplace?
Yeah. I mean, the great thing, the book was part of it. I think OKRs are, as you mentioned, are not necessarily new. You know, Intel often gets a lot of the credit for starting the concept with Andy Grove. Google gets a lot of the credit for creating the big tech success story, relatively recent success story. I think the overall market continues to grow. There's more, if we simply look at, search demand or interest in exploring software or consulting services, OKRs continue to grow. In all parts of the world. I think the U.S., North America, and Europe have a predominant role to play. Most of the interest comes from those countries. We see a lot of interest from India. There's a lot of engineering firms that have built OKR or are building OKRs into what they do. And then an increase in other markets, Korea, other parts of Southeast Asia, Latin America, where I think the trends at different rates will continue to grow. The pandemic has really only spiked that. I'm sure you've seen some of this too, but the increase in people working from home, the ability to use OKRs as a tool to focus has really ramped up the interest in, for those who don't know what it is, what do I need to know? For those who've used it in pockets, how do I use this more broadly?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, companies that we work with to a person have said, thank God we had this in play, because it allowed us to stay more connected, focused, aligned, and allowed us to execute actually through, times that we've all never seen before. What do you think, Dustin, in your opinion, when folks come in and begin to work with you, what are the largest challenges do you think they face as they begin to look at an OKR program throughout their organization?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of commonalities that we start to see across programs that we've implemented where both they've been successful, and I can talk about those, but where they haven't been so successful, either with us or with others, in the past. Often, I think there's one big thing, and it's a lack of executive sponsorship. The lack of executive sponsorship creates what we like to think of as like going to the gym, right? It's really easy to get excited and to start something. It's easy to walk. It's great if you could wake up and say, I'm going to go to the gym today. That's a great start. Week 2, week 4, week 8, if your plan was to go 4 or 5 times a week, it often starts to fall down. And so in the workflow, repetitive nature, visibility, that's often driven at some executive level. And so what we see is when there's executive sponsorship and there's adoption from an executive team, the reinforcement mechanisms are there. And without that, you rely on teams to be able to bubble up. And it's a difficult thing to do for any sort of, complex enterprise. Mm-hmm. I think the second thing is when organizations start to see that OKRs are not simply a tool, but a mindset. It's the way we think about bringing strategy to every conversation. It almost creates a sense of transparency that at some point in time companies say, am I really ready for this? You can see my goals and my progress against my goals. Is that what I want? I wanted to see yours. I didn't know if I wanted you to see mine.
See mine, right.
Yeah. But when you then start to realize that goals to a lot of people mean personal, the reflection of you personally, a reflection of you as an individual. OKRs are a reflection of your ability to move business objectives forward. And when you start to see, when that mindset shifts, then you realize that is what we want. We do want full transparency. I want to know how marketing is doing relative to, dependencies in engineering and figure out where the broken links are so that we can advance them. So fantastic. Those are probably the two biggest issues.
If there was one or two things, and you've been involved in so many conversations with large organizations, where does their hesitancy lie sometimes when they look at objectives and key results? What gives them pause? And then maybe the reverse to that is what gives them the ability to make that decision to move forward?
Yeah, well, I think the Betterworks model is a service-supported software model, mm-hmm. meaning we have enough experience with customers and enough experience on our team and with our investors to recognize that software itself isn't going to solve all the problems. Right. And as a software company, it can be humbling to say sometimes, but simply turning on Betterworks software is likely not going to solve the challenges. Supporting those challenges with the level of change that may be necessary, executive adoption, as we talked about, program leadership, as companies start to recognize that this may be a reasonable effort to get right across a company, it can change the way they started it, which was, hey, can I just buy this OKR tool? Mm-hmm. It opens up some interesting conversations, which often don't get brought up at the beginning. What was I trying to achieve by bringing in this OKR tool? I want some focus and I want some accountability. Those are things that companies want. It would be hard to find somebody who didn't want that. The question is, when you get that, when there is more focus, when there is more accountability, when there is transparency, what happens? What happens from a business value standpoint? What happens from a customer value standpoint? And then you start to realize that it is pretty significant for most organizations, which clicks with the significance of how seriously they take the effort. And that's where the conversation moves into high gear.
Yeah, well said. So I'm going to shift conversation a bit here. What makes Betterworks one of today's leading software providers for OKR programs?
Sure, it's having John Doerr as our endorser is a significant differentiator for us. I think we've combined that with a board of directors and advisors that provide complementary views as an organization like ours grows. Every customer we face, there are similarities, but they do all have their unique challenges. For example, organizations across the board that try to add another piece of software that is difficult to find or difficult to get into or requires a lot of training, those are hurdles that you have to overcome. So part of our board comes with this view of what's the user experience? Is it intuitive? Is it easy to use? We don't need people to have to figure out a lot of things. That's one big angle when we think of, can somebody turn it on? Can a mid-level manager figure out, hey, what are the OKRs? How are they connected? Things like that. The second thing is the complexity at the enterprise level. I think there is a big difference between trying to solve a problem for 20-person teams or a startup of 100 people compared to a department of 1,500 people or a company of 20,000 people or larger than that.
Right.
The complexities become quite different, and the approach would be different.
Yeah. How about a little bit more about Betterworks and its integration with some of today's leading software programs? Maybe you could touch on that. That's where it goes over my head. So I thought maybe you could touch a little bit about that. A lot of people are using Jira, Slack, Salesforce. How does that work with Betterworks?
Yeah, the part of being intuitive is recognizing where work gets done. And Betterworks, for example, comes with out-of-the-box integrations with Salesforce, with Jira, with Asana, with Google, G Suite. The idea is if you're doing work, you're doing it often in some other. You're either in email or you're doing it in one of those other tools. And so rather than ask folks to duplicate work, grab that, leave that source of truth where it is, and input the data. So, for example, as a key result is updated from an epic in Jira, that is connected. So you're doing the work in Jira, and it's reflected in Betterworks. The other way we do it is make it easy to see. If you think of OKRs at the highest level, they're about priorities. And if you think many white collar workers sit in their email all day, well, let's create a place where they can see their OKRs without having to leave their email, and they can do updates from there. They can comment, they can nudge, they can poke, things like that. So that's an important workflow for connectors. In today's day and age, the open API configuration means you can transfer a lot of data back and forth, and duplicating it is simply a lot to ask for people when it's not necessary.
Right. Absolutely. This has been great today, and thank you so much. So any other advice you'd like to give our audience about OKRs, programs, that little secret tidbit that no one really knows that they're dying to hear?
So maybe two things.
Sure.
One, gone are the days of kind of management by walking around, and in the remote environment, you have to have a mechanism that allows you to keep people focused on what really matters. You can't see people. It's calling into question a lot of traditional leadership approaches. Now that I can't see people, I can't see what they're doing, so the nature of my conversations needs to change. So part of Betterworks' model is this conversation feedback recognition model. That becomes really important when you have scheduled Zoom. We're on Zoom all day, or web conferencing all day. I need to know what those conversations are going to be about. And so the OKR CFR model ties a lot of that together. I think the other thing is it's okay to start wherever you feel comfortable starting. Google Sheets is a great Excel. Google Sheets are, if you have a small team, you can do OKRs in a tool like that. As you grow and scale, one of the things that you want to be able to do is pivot quickly. And if you have a software system that allows you to see right now, where's our progress? And if we shift priorities right now, how does it impact everybody else? That's where a tool like Betterworks will really help. And so we're happy to talk about anybody who wants to talk about Betterworks. The thing that we would all benefit from is get comfortable, use OKRs, no matter where you start. It's getting to the gym is the starting.
You got to start somewhere. And I think what we've seen with our clients is everybody gets better every week they go through it, and every quarter they go through it, and every year they go through it. Well, Dustin, I wanted to thank you so much. I know our audience will love this conversation, and I so much appreciate you spending time today with us, and I hope you have a terrific Q3. And